Well, Oregon's got a new transfer, and when I first heard the news, I was scratching my head.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Plenty to get to today. I've got my wish list, not a candidates list per se, but my wish list for Oregon wide receiver coaches to replace Junior Adams, who's now with the Dallas Cowboys. And how does Oregon football actually get over the hump, plus a big game for hoops tonight? But I thought the biggest news was, well, who's going to replace Junior Adams as Oregon's wide receiver coach? Let's examine. And then Oregon, out of the blue a little bit, adds a transfer. So the newest member of the flock is Jadon Canady. I believe I have that pronunciation correct. I apologize if I do not. But he's a grad transfer from Ole Miss, where he's been for the last couple of years. He was at Tulane prior to that. He's a class of 2021 recruit. This is his final year of eligibility, and he's not bringing a super high profile compared to other Oregon transfers. Mekhi Hughes was the highest graded Pro Football Focus running back in the country and one of the highest, maybe the highest graded running back transfer that changed teams this offseason. And Dylan Thieneman was the top safety. And Isaiah World recently got upgraded by 24/7 Sports to 5-star status as a transfer coming over from Nevada at offensive tackle. Canady doesn't have that type of profile here, even though he's a veteran. Super experienced guy. Now, because he's a defensive back, I have to say very early on in this segment, he's listed at 5'10", 175 pounds, which means in the eyes of many, he's completely unfit and incapable of being a starting caliber player because he's not 6 feet tall. That's intense sarcasm, by the way. I just want to make that clear. But he comes over with 4 years of experience. Last year, didn't do anything crazy. He did have 11 pass breakups, which is a sizable number. He had 38 tackles as well. He was the second most snap corner at Ole Miss. Played mostly on the outside. Stephen Willis of Locked On Rebels thinks he might be more well-suited to be a slot corner because, well, he is just a tad shorter than some of the other guys out there. But he had a 68.8 overall Pro Football Focus grade, 70 in coverage, 68 in run defense, and around 60 in a pass rush grade, which Oregon does a decent amount with their safeties, but he has a whopping 0 stars as his rating on 24/7 Sports in the transfer portal right now. Coming out of high school, this was not a super highly touted guy. He was a 3-star recruit who wasn't even a top 100 cornerback in the class of 2021. So he's been around college football for a while. He's been at 2 different stops. And so I was scratching my head going, what exactly is Oregon doing? Why are they doing this? Because they have so many options in that secondary room already. Do they not believe in any of those guys? Maybe they don't think a big number of those guys are ready, even though a lot of us, myself included, would like them to be. But the connection here is to Chris Hampton, who is Oregon's co-defensive coordinator and secondary coach. When Canady was at Tulane, his defensive coordinator was none other than Chris Hampton. So the way this comes off to me, even though he was a highly snapped player at Ole Miss this past year, I asked Locked On Ole Miss host Stephen Willis about him. He said, yeah, he's a pretty good player. He's solid, but he got penalized a lot. And his PFF grade, as I said, is not blowing you away, and he's not garnering all sorts of hype and attention. To me, this reads far more in the Connor Soley level edition, Cam Alexander, than it does Dylan Thieneman or even Theron Johnson. And I don't know that there's a guarantee Theron Johnson plays. I would suspect he does. But there are a lot of guys in that secondary room, and it's going to be a battle throughout all of spring camp. So it's his final year of eligibility, going back to play with the guy. I don't know all the details about, what was going on at Ole Miss. Maybe he wasn't going to see the field, but like I said, he was, logging over 600 snaps this past year with the Rebels, but he enters the portal as a graduate transfer, which is why he can come out now, because graduate transfers can go into the portal and come out of the portal. Well, anyone can go in the portal, anyone can come out of the portal at any time. You can only go into the portal during those specified windows, one in the winter, of course, and then there will be another one after spring ball in April. So I think for Oregon, this is certainly a veteran depth piece, a guy who's been around and you could count on. I don't see him as being someone that is immediately called upon to be thrust into a starting role. Maybe he ends up earning that. Maybe he's just on the 2 deep. Maybe he's the, 6th defensive back like Dante Manning was this past year. Oregon lost its top 6 DBs: Kobe Savage, Tyshim Johnson, Brandon Johnson, Nico Reed, Jabbar Muhammad, Dante Manning. All of those guys at different positions were integral to Oregon secondary this past year, and they're replacing all of them. And I still say today, even though I think Theron Johnson can be a solid player, has proven to be a solid player in the Big Ten, I don't know that he's an automatic plug and play, going to be a starter all season long and log over 600 snaps for Oregon. Maybe he logs more like 300-400 snaps and is on a timeshare with Canady, for instance. So I think this is just another option and someone that Chris Hampton knows from his past, and he wants to go play for a coach who he knew previously, who he committed to coming out of high school at Tulane. That's how this reads and feels more to me than, Oregon is just punting on all of the young guys that they have recruited in the last couple cycles in the secondary, or anyone who's on the roster that's returning or anything like that. It could be, kind of a backup surefire option. Quite frankly, I wouldn't want to see him become a bona fide starter in this Oregon secondary, because this isn't how the coaching staff likely views the situation. This is just how I view 2025 Oregon football. Yes, I want them to be as good as they can, sort of. I want them to build for 2026, because I think that's going to be a better shot for them to win a national championship. And if that means playing young guys with a higher ceiling but a lower floor of production now, so that you raise their floor going into 2026, then I think you go ahead and do that. And I think Oregon can walk and chew gum at the same time in that respect. But I don't look at, a guy like this as your typical transfer. This feels more Cam Alexander, Connor Soley, Junior Angulau, where you see how he could end up having, or even Sione Laulea, quite frankly. Someone who was the top JUCO corner coming out of last year's cycle and didn't see the field in a significant way. He was in the second unit that got in there in garbage time. Heck, he could be a starting corner this year for the Ducks. You never know. Plus, he's 6'3", so he fulfills everyone's most important quality there. But I think this has the potential to impact the secondary rotation for a number of guys. Or we could look back and go, yeah, he just never really played. Like, Soley didn't have as much proven experience as Canady does when Soley transferred from Arizona State the last couple of years, but he was a transfer that didn't guarantee him a starting slot. He never worked his way up the depth chart in a significant way. You had guys like Devin Jackson, homegrown recruit, or Jeff Bassa, homegrown veteran recruit, or Bryce Betcher, all surpass him on the depth chart and keep him there. So I know that when a starter gets added, it's reasonable to look at him and go, oh, well, this guy's automatically going to be a starter. It's not always the case. I think this is one of those guys. But, Jalil Florence or Theron Johnson, Naeem Offord, Brandon Finney, Rod Pleasant, Dorian Finney, Dorian Brew, Ife Obadegwu, Dakota Fields, Sione Laulea. I think that those are the guys who could be impacted by this, but also are going to have, I think, every opportunity in spring ball to beat him out on the depth chart, because he's not, like Thieneman. I don't think there's a player on Oregon's roster that is as good as Dylan Thieneman. That guy's locked into starting. So at the very least, Canady doesn't bring that sort of profile as a player. And why, at first I was scratching my head going, well, why would they do that? And then as I looked into it more, I went, maybe he just wanted to play his final year of college football with someone who he knows and could have a chance to play. But I don't think I'm not placing big expectations on Jadon Canady here coming over from Ole Miss. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below or hit me up on Twitter. I'm going to give you a wish list. Not a candidates list, not a I've heard Oregon's targeting this guy list, a wish list for Oregon's wide receiver coach position, because there are other good ones out there. Oregon didn't have the only good one. A name or two or three or four that you should know. One name you should definitely know is Wayfair. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine, and Wayfair is here to help you do just that. Whether you're tidying up, cleaning out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, Wayfair has everything that you need all within your budget. They've got a huge selection, so it's easy to find pieces that fit your style and your budget, and they have free and hassle-free delivery even for the larger items. Wayfair's site is easy to navigate. You'll find everything that you need in no time. There's something for every style and every home, and Wayfair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals with endless inspiration for every space. So whatever your decor style is, whatever your budget range is, they're going to be able to get you what you want. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Is Oregon's receiver coach vacancy really as simple as hire a guy on the roster? Could very well be. For those who are not aware, Rashad Samples, who was almost hired by the Dallas Cowboys, but decided to stay with the Ducks at least for one more year, has been an assistant coach for receivers twice in his career. Texas 2018 and at Arizona State 2023 before he came to Oregon. And Samples is a great guy to have on the roster, someone who coaches, I believe Kenny Dillingham has said he believes Rashad Samples will be a head coach in college football one day and has that sort of career trajectory and pedigree. And as Dan Lanning has shown, if you want to get those opportunities, you can do that under Dan Lanning. Dillingham having plenty of success. Will Stein, I can't imagine Stein is around past the 26 season. I could see him being there for 26. After that, I imagine he tries to find a head coaching opportunity. But for Rashad Samples, him transitioning to be the wide receiver coach could make a whole heck of a lot of sense. He was instrumental in DeCorian Moore's recruitment. Now, there was a unique tie there, of course, because his dad coaches at Duncanville High School where DeCorian went. But still, he's pulled in the highest rated wide receiver, or helped pull in the highest rated wide receiver and the second highest rated recruit in the history of Oregon football. So recruiting that position, which is where I think losing Junior Adams is probably the biggest loss. I'd say, man, that's tough because the room has been so productive and so good, but it all starts with the guys that they bring in on the trail. Like, yes, Junior Adams came into a second-year receiver named Troy Franklin and helped him pop with Bo Nix at quarterback into a fourth-round pick by the Broncos. And in 2023, he was really good, and in 2024, he was great. And Tez Johnson went from a guy no one had heard of at Troy, who was still Bo Nix's brother at the time, to being someone that is flying up NFL draft boards. Because of what he did at the Senior Bowl, he was virtually unguardable. So I'm definitely bummed to lose Junior Adams. I am excited, though, that Rashad Samples is sticking around. He could make plenty of sense. It would, of course, then create a void. Who are you going to hire as the running backs coach? Are you going to promote from within, or do you go from the outside? This is always a measured calculation for head coaches, and there's never a right answer. It is entirely dependent on the individuals you have in the room, because Lanning went promote from within for, well, several coaching vacancies, but when there was an offensive coordinator hire, he went outside, brought in Will Stein from UTSA. Like it is always dependent upon who you have on staff. Sometimes promoting from within can be the right move. You know, Chris Hampton went from safeties coach to overall secondary coach. Well, that's just kind of the right move. I think that Hampton is really good in a number of ways. He just won 24/7 Sports Recruiter of the Year. Pretty good. Pretty darn, not too shabby there. But if Oregon were to make an outside hire, here's my wish list. And I'd be totally cool with Samples being the wide receivers coach, and then we would move on to, well, who's going to be the running backs coach? Who do you hire and where do you look? But I'll give you 3 names that would be on my wish list. I want to make this clear. These have not been reported anywhere. This is just, hey, Spencer, you can go out and hire who you want as Oregon's wide receiver coach. I've got 3 names for you. Name number 1, Brian Hartline, Ohio State. Is this going to happen? Nope. Highly, highly unlikely. This would be the only way until I see who the hire is, and maybe it's someone that I haven't heard of who's got a really great under-the-radar college football profile that's even flying under my radar, someone who watches a lot of college football. In case you didn't know, I host a daily podcast just like this one on the Ducks. That one's all about college football, covering the entire sport. So when I think about who I would want first and foremost, yeah, Hartline's probably the most high profile and successful position coach in all of college football. So yeah, of course that'd be the dream, but is that realistic? No. You know who could be realistic? Jamarcus Shepard. And Shepard is a guy who is currently on Kalen DeBoer's staff as the wide receiver coach. I have heard his name pop up in coaching circles several times over the last couple of years as being a dynamite coach and a really good recruiter. He was with Kalen DeBoer up at Washington for a couple of years. He is now down at Alabama. If that name emerged, I don't know if Lanning knows him. I don't know if there's a tie or a connection. But if that were to end up being the hire, I'd say, boy, that's a pretty darn good situation. And yes, Junior Adams was the one who recruited the wide receivers that Jamarcus Shepard ended up coaching while at Washington. But you can't deny the output from that position group for the Huskies in the last couple of years when Junior Adams made the move from Washington down to Oregon. So a guy who has a tie to the West Coast, a guy who's got an incredibly solid track record and is also currently coaching at a really high-profile school with a big-time wide receiver target, a young wide receiver in Ryan Williams, who, if he were to come to Oregon, would then be coaching DeCorian Moore and would understand how to make true freshmen successful with in a Power 4 conference. Yeah, I'd be super down for that. Super, super down. So that's a name to throw out there. Another one is Cortez Hankton. And again, I have no indication that these guys are available, looking to leave, but no one's ever looking to leave until the right offer comes along with the right dollar amount. I don't think Junior Adams was out there actively shopping his name saying, I want to get out of here, this isn't any good, or anything like that. He wouldn't have stayed for 3 years if that was the case. You know, Carlos Loughlin, there were some, I don't know, not super credible, but like kind of indications that he and Lanning didn't always get along. I don't really know, but it seemed like Carlos Loughlin wanted to leave, so he left. Made a lateral move over to Ohio State. Junior Adams, though, you get an opportunity to go coach in the NFL. That's unique. That's different. That looks different on a resume if you're someone who's trying to be a head coach one day. So Hankton down at LSU is someone who I was drawn to when one of you asked, hey, who would be on your wish list for the wide receiver coach? Because I'm thinking about who are the best wide receiver rooms consistently in college football. And in 2023, man, that wide receiver room was good. Brian Thomas flew under the radar, first round pick, and draft him in fantasy football next year. I mean, the Jags, I don't know. But hey, he was really good this past season. They also had Kyron Lacey. They also had Malik Neighbors. Like the recruiting, the development, LSU, Ohio State, best wide receiver rooms in the country. Now, there could be other really good wide receiver coaches out there, but those are the ones that stand out the most to me in what I know about college football, as those are the sorts of receiver rooms I felt like Junior Adams was trending towards churning out on an annual basis. And those are guys who have proven that they can do that at the college level. And I think they'd be able to succeed with Oregon. So Rashad Samples might be the most likely option. And then we can go into speculating about who could Oregon's running backs coach be. But if I were to have my choice, yeah, I'd have Hartline 1, Shepard 2, and Cortez Hankton down at LSU number 3. That'd be my dream list, any of those guys. But Lanning will probably find someone who will go, who? And then go, oh, this guy, greatest thing since sliced bread. Can't wait for it. Can't wait, as always. So, How does Oregon get over the hump? How do they go from a Tier 1 program that doesn't have a national championship to a Tier 1 program that does have a national championship? I've got one way. All right, it's mailbag time. YouTube comments, that's a way to get in the mailbag. Twitter at @McLaughlinCFB or @LockedOnDucks. DMs and mentions wide open, not open. That's a way to get in the mailbag. Or become a Locked On Ducks insider. Link in the description below. You can get a free 14-day trial. You get all sorts of perks in addition to priority mailbag access. So, Tavon sent this question in. What's up, Spence? Love all your breakdown, analysis, and deep description for each position. I do my very best. Thank you, good sir. What do you think Oregon makes it to the biggest game, or why do you think Oregon makes it to the biggest games that would separate them among the rest of the top-ranked teams, and for the majority of the times come up short, or it's always a really close game if they come out on the winning side? What do you think they need to do in order for them to become a juggernaut team that separates when it matters? Well, first of all, I think the first half of that question could be worded a little bit smoother, but hey, that's okay. I get the gist of what you're going for. How does Oregon get over the hump? They are in the process of doing everything you need in order to build that championship season. They had a shot at it this year. They just got outcoached. And when Oregon went to the national championship game in Chip Kelly's second year in 2010, one thing that should never go overlooked about that game in particular and that whole season, Nick Aliotti had been a defensive coordinator since 1999. And in the biggest game, Oregon was out-talented by Auburn across the board. They did not have an offensive lineman that could have blocked Nick Fairley on a regular basis. They didn't even have two who could block Nick Fairley on a regular basis in that game. He was just the best player on the field. He was better than Cam Newton. I have shouted that from the mountaintops every chance I've gotten so that everyone understands how that game played out. But Nick Aliotti was the reason Oregon was in that game. Chip Kelly, of course, went for two a couple times and had some great situational play calls. But overall, the offense wasn't lighting the world on fire. It wasn't a shootout of a game. It was a defensive slugfest where Oregon forced a turnover late. Why? Because Aliotti was a really good DC and a great ball coach. And I bring that up to say that Dan Lanning is in his third year, just finished his third year as a head coach. And Tosh Lupoy was away from being a DC for a while, and Will Stein is a young guy. And I'm not saying Oregon has to go out and hire a veteran coordinator. There are a lot of veteran coordinators that have succeeded over the last couple of years to win national championships. But there have also been young guys that have had a lot of success over the last couple of years. Head coach of my Seahawks, Mike McDonald, was at Michigan. He's a young guy. He's the youngest head coach in the NFL. I love him. I think he's great. And he was great for Michigan. Jim Harbaugh won a national championship. Ryan Day won a national championship. So you give yourself the best chance you can year in and year out. But then when you get to that game, you have to have better coaching than the other side. If you build a roster like Oregon did this past year, and I think the NFL draft is going to prove what I have said all season long and into the offseason as well, even after Oregon got blown out in the Rose Bowl, there was not some Grand Canyon-sized gap between Ohio State and Oregon. Yes, the Buckeyes are probably going to have more players drafted, and you'll be able to look back definitively and say, yeah, that was a better roster. But I watched those same teams, play at Autzen Stadium, and Oregon was the better team that day. And going into the Rose Bowl, Ohio State had the better game plan. Ohio State had every answer for what Oregon wanted to do on both sides, and Oregon didn't have the right sorts of adjustments during the game. And it was a coaching thing. They had a real shot there. So you go back to the drawing board and you keep building. You keep building, and then eventually you'll have that magical season where the coaching staff is better than everybody they go against in the playoff. And they get the breaks, and this bounce goes that way. And heck, Oregon might have won that game. Dyer was down forever and always, but even if he was correctly called down, Auburn might still go on to win the game. They still had a minute or so. Who's to say they don't hit a couple of big plays? You don't know. You don't know. But those sorts of bounce the ball situations, same thing I think in 2014 against Ohio State in the national championship game, that Ohio State roster was considerably better. I think the gap between those two teams was larger roster-wise than this past season. But that's just how large the coaching gap was on that day. So you've got to have a coaching staff that has been through it enough where they know how to motivate their guys, how to formulate a game plan, how to form the right adjustments. Remember when Dan Lanning blew a lead at Oregon State in 2022? It was pathetic. I mean, that was inexcusably bad to blow that lead. Oregon State couldn't complete a pass. It's one of the most embarrassing days in the history of Oregon football. Do you think Dan Lanning's a better coach now than he was then? I notice he hasn't blown any 20-plus point leads since then. You know why? He's gotten better. Tosh Lupoi's gotten better. They made improvements. They made the roster better, but they've gotten better as coaches. When to call this play, this coverage, that blitz, all what to do, what not to do. There's a trial and error part of this for coaches, and you can't expect Lanning to win it right away because you just have to have a certain number of years under your belt. You just do. And I don't know exactly how long it's going to take. Right now, if you ask, I'd say Dan Lanning wins a national championship at Oregon within the next 5 years. I think it's just as likely to be 2026 as it would be 2027 or 28. You play the hands as they get dealt to you on a year-by-year basis. But what's Oregon missing in the big games is that combination of a special top 5 roster in the sport and a coaching staff that's ready for that moment. The roster was ready for the Rose Bowl this year. Coaching staff wasn't. So now you get back to the drawing board and you figure out, okay, how do we build a roster again that is at that level, that has that many NFL guys at various positions with high-level quarterback play? And then, are we better as a coaching staff? That's where I think you get to. So, I'll close with this. Oregon basketball plays Northwestern today, and I chuckle because, man, if they don't win this game, it is going to be full. I might do a full basketball show, no football whatsoever, because it would be full-fledged chaos. Oregon needs to win both these games. If they do, they will stabilize their NCAA tournament situation. Lenardi, as today's show is coming out, will have his latest bracketology. I don't know what it is yet, but we'll just see. And I imagine Oregon will be about an 8 seed after one time being up in the 3 seed. That was 5 games ago. So they need a win. Northwestern is not that good. Rutgers is not that good. These games are at home. Play some darn defense and go win the game. And if you're in Eugene, get to Matthew Knight Arena and create the best environment you can. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.